Hey, Scott, if you take your seat, please, sir. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our council work session for April 18th. We've got kind of a full agenda this morning, and I'm looking forward to getting updated on the Northside Community Recreation Center, now known as the Grub Y, plus the neighborhood toolkit and the noise control permits around 9th and Mulberry. So quickly, I'm going to turn it over to our manager. Scott, anything to say here?
Mayor and Council, I'll let the speakers come forward, and as they do, we've got a great agenda this morning with the first item. Obviously, we're very aware of this project and the opportunities that lie with this neighborhood. So we wanted to get our consultants in front of you to understand what the goal is looking like, and then to see if we can't get some more nonprofit partners to make it even a more special project. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Ann.
Thank you. Honorable Mayor, members of council, good morning. My name is Ann Sobiek-Munson. I'm the city architect, and I'm here representing a group of city staff from both Parks and Recreation and Facilities who worked with our consultant team on this project throughout the planning phase. Now, the planning phase has resulted in a set of recommendations and project parameters and requirements that will serve as a foundation going forward into our future phases. I would like to take a minute and just recognize a couple of the others on the team that are here today. From Parks and Recreation, in our working group, we have Jenny Richmond, Assistant Director, Daniel Calvert, Planning and Development Administrator, Janice Steele, Recreation Manager, Eric Dahl, Park Planner, and Jen Fletcher in Marketing. And from Facilities, myself and Jim Hoff. So we were the city group working with them. I also want to take a minute and thank our communications office, Al and his team. David Durong helped us with a website that is where we collect all the project information, and we will continue to put project updates on the website. And then you'll see later on in the presentation a video created by Peter Zemansky that is a useful tool in communicating with the media about the outcomes of this phase. The last group I'd like to recognize, but certainly not least, is the community participants we had. You'll see from the overview that we had 6 public meetings. There was a core group of at least 36 people that came to nearly every meeting. Some of them are here today in this working audience, the work session audience, and I'm really proud that what we came out of this phase with is a true collective vision that reflects many of the voices that participated in that process. Our consultant team was made of MA Architecture, a Des Moines-based architecture firm, in collaboration with Genus Landscape Architects, also based in Des Moines, and Latent Design, which is a Chicago-based architecture and design build firm. To give you the overview of the outcomes of the process, I'm going to turn it over to Mindy Ost. She is principal and owner of MA Architecture, and she'll take it from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Ann. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. We're excited about this. It was a lot of fun as we went through the process, and thank you for the introduction. Look forward. So on the agenda, we quickly go over this. The vision, goals, and guiding principles, which were essential to this project, formulated at the beginning and read at every meeting. Quickly go over the process, and then, as Ann mentioned, the outcomes are the recommendations, and then wrap up by looking ahead at any questions that you have. There you can see the leads for each of the kind of people heading up the consultant team. Catherine Darnstedt, who was a public face at all the public meetings, presented at each one of them. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here today. She's in front of Chicago City Council, myself, and Brett Douglas, who's here today as well. These are the vision, goals, and guiding principles. As Ann said, they were essential to the project. They were read before every meeting just to remind everybody. They became the lens with which this group worked. You can see the vision to serve community needs and provide opportunities for recreation through a vibrant design.
Hear you at all.
And as you can see in the goals and guiding principles, really equity was essential to this and a focus.
Now I can hear you, Ed. Okay, I'm just going to watch it on YouTube because I can't hear it.
Linda, are you on?
I am on.
Okay. Go ahead.
This graphic represents the process through images. You can see at the beginning, kind of using sticky notes through question prompts with the public to create their vision, touring the existing facilities. In the second row, you can see images of the stations from public meeting 2, some of the material and the benchmarking that was done. In the third column, you can see the material as we started to develop program groupings and started to look at analysis of existing building versus renovation. In the third row, continuing to look at existing building and renovation, and also starting to hear the public comments being integrated into the design. And the third, you can see the final recommendation and the renderings. You also have handouts in front of you, 11 by 17, so if you want to look at these more closely, you can. I know they aren't legible on the screen, but you can see in the bottom the kind of bullet points. This is an 8-month process. It started with tours of the existing CRCs and the Grub Y, obviously. We had 16 city core group meetings throughout, 4 advisory committee meetings made from city staff, CMO, civil and human rights, neighborhood services, a broad range of people from the city. We had 3 additional site-focused workshops with Parks and Recreation planning staff, 5 public meetings and the open house, and then we also engaged youth through the YMCA high school basketball program and the Girl Scouts as well, which was really neat. In public meeting 2, we kind of realized we needed to be more transparent about the process. This group of the public was really engaged and really dove into the material, so created this timeline. You can see the material in the middle represents this planning process, and then the dates to the left kind of documenting the history of the site. We thought it was critical to understand that. Starting, you can see in 1982 when the city of Des Moines acquired the site and has owned it since then. And then moving forward, the fundraising and the design and construction. This has been really helpful to the public as they started to understand, where we are in this big, long process. These represent boards that were at the open house. We thought it was important to show the work that's been done and the decisions that were made, and how they were made and presented. So there were 18 boards at the open house. These are the ones that documented the process. Again, as Ann mentioned, we're really proud of the 6 public meetings, over 200 community conversations, and consistently at each public meeting, we were seeing the same people that were very ingrained in the process. They really took the time to understand the material and to give very thoughtful feedback. We had over 50 youth engaged through the basketball and Girl Scouts. We've also started a storytelling project to kind of document the stories and memories of this site. When we had 9 public community members interviewed for that, that's ongoing. Equivalent of 500 hours given by the community to the activities. And additional interactions there were postcards mailed of over 1,100, over 110 homes visited, 70 plus people on the email list that keeps growing, and over 30 community organizations were either contacted or joining the public meetings. The outcomes of the public meetings, I'm not going to read these, but you have them. To summarize, in public meeting 1, was really starting to ask questions and probe and get their vision. And we heard a lot of memories, positive memories of the site, and a lot about the events that take place there. Public meeting 2, we understood there was confusion about Northside versus Grub YMCA, so we started to clarify that. The need for more meetings, we actually added 2 public meetings after this. But we also had stations where we were able to gather input about what programs the community wants and needs. We also started to hear the preference for where the building might be located. Gina's had a station with puzzle pieces that they were able to move buildings around, whether it was existing building or new, and we started to see it raise to the top. That 9th and College was the desired spot. Public meeting 3, we heard a lot of feelings. Some anger a little bit that this is a hand-me-down building, and so that was kind of a desire for a new building. But we kept renovation as an option. We evaluated the embodied carbon versus new versus existing. The community, we heard from that they really want this facility to be something to attract new members to the community. On public meeting 4, we showed a $12 million option, and we started to show additional options, and we started to hear that $12 million wasn't enough from the public, and you're going to see that in the presentation. We started to hear the track being identified as a priority. The pool was also identified as a priority early on. And in public meeting 5, a desire for new construction, an overwhelming desire. The community continues to be very aspirational about wanting more than the $12 million that's allocated can provide. And then we also heard that they want to continue to be involved in the process. So now I'm going to move into the outcomes or recommendations. This is an overall isometric drawing of the site. We go from Jefferson to College and 9th to 11th. You can see the building at the white box in the, on the right side is located at 9th and College. Also part of this project was creating the vision or plan for developing a park adjacent to it. So you can see the park amenities that separate from the $12 million allocated, but wanted to really develop it integral to the building, right? You don't want to develop one or the other, you want to make sure that they speak to each other.
Does the city own all this land?
The city is in the middle of acquiring the corner of 9th and College. Correct?
And Fifth Judicial is not.
That the building is on. About, 3/4 of the building currently is on land that I believe the city is in the midst of acquiring.
So
And then Fifth Judicial is not ours as well. Right.
Correct. The 5th Judicial Building on the upper right is not. And their parking lot to the west of there. So if I can show you on the screen. So this
There you go.
to here is not in the city's.
I see it on the front page now.
Oh, yeah. Great. You can see the outline in blue and in pink. We tried to outline what would be part of the $12 million already allocated and what would be an additional project in the pink. I guess some of the things to point out is the parking currently is located there, reorganizing it to allow for stormwater management. We're also connecting to existing trails. That was part of important to the park's planning. You can see a wider sidewalk along the west to tie into the existing parks. You can see an open air shelter, basketball courts, playground, handball, which currently exists there now, and a multi-purpose field. This diagram shows you how our strategy for showing a 12 million that is allocated funds and what it would be for 15 or 18 if the program and spaces were to grow. So the first column is the 12 million, 15 million in the middle, that scenario, and 18 million on the right. You can see it's a combination of some new programs show up, such as the track shows up in the 15 million. We cannot make it fit into the 12 million. You can see more community spaces, more out of the box, more space for spectators around the gymnasium, obviously, the circulation and back of house grows throughout each one. We can come back to this as more questions, but really honed in that 15 million was kind of a minimum to get the spaces that they want. They really want to shoot for the 18 million, the public does, knowing that the 12 million really doesn't get them everything that they desire. These are some concept plans to start to show you some possible arrangements on the site. They look more finished than they are, but really to show adjacencies. One thing on the site, from the mid-block and College down to 9th, there's about a 16-foot drop. And it might not have been as apparent on that isometric, but So we took advantage of that in laying this out. So on 9th Street are the 2-story volumes, so the gym and the pool, and the building appears as a 1-story volume on the west side. So that was the 9th Street level. This would be the parking and west side level with a 2-story volume that connects the 2 entries with that stair in between. So this level has the walking track above the gym and these community rooms, which we use a strategy of a porch on the west side. So as spaces need to be accessed during maybe hours that the facility's not open, you could have the community room be rentable during off hours, the bathrooms, obviously, things like that. And these might help explain that a little bit. So this is a view from the west side of the parking. It's a 1-story, appears to be a 1-story volume. It has the playground, it'd have the restroom access, it'd have a slight drop-off area for parents or others using the facility. You can see that porch, which we think its connection to this community lawn. There's a lot of community events, and creating green space for that to happen was important. And then having a little bit of covered space there off the porch. Here you can see that grade drop. College is on the left. You can see it drop away, and that is the sidewalk heights now. The 2-story volumes, so you can see into the pool. To the right would be the gymnasium, and then up above the walking track. And then there's an entry proposed, again, a concept illustration on 9th Street. Here's a picture on the other side, the west side of that community porch. And you can start to see having a relationship with the community rooms and the playgrounds. You could see this would be a lot of activity going on in here. And then some interior views. So the upper left is if you came in on 9th Street, you'd be able to come into this 2-story volume that you'd be able to see all the way through the building. To the right would be the gymnasium, to the left would be the pool doors, and you could go up the stairs to the walking track and others. There would be an elevator as well. There's one planned in that similar area. The community room, and you can start to see the community porch to the right. And then showing the gymnasium, which is critical not to have one smaller than the current grub Y. That was something we also heard. So the one that's planned right now is an NBA size with 2 junior high cross courts with the elevated walking track above and cardio and weights beyond. And as I mentioned as well, the time with park planners and working through a strategy for how the park might be implemented, full basketball court with green space, and an open-air shelter with a multi-purpose field beyond, thinking the open-air shelter could serve both basketball and the lawn and also the multi-purpose field. We thought we'd end with some pictures from the open house. It was well received by the open house. I think everyone is excited but cautious about the future of this project. It was really celebratory there to show all these boards. You saw the boards when you came in, a lot, as well as the process boards. Looking ahead, we're in the midst of finishing the report. It's about 150 pages right now, but kind of wrapping up all of this material. And then the next phase, as we understand, it's moving into a year of fundraising with the anticipation that a design professional would be hired in the spring of 2023. We did include the website there. It was critical to the project. Every presentation was posted to the website. All of the handout materials were posted to the website, and there was online input at every meeting as well that we gathered. And then there's an image of the website, which was super great. And then we're going to play the video that was created. So we can. Oh my gosh. Should have tested it. Yeah, any questions? That wraps up our presentation.
I just want to say I'm very grateful to the city team who worked on this and the consultant team that worked on this. I know this was all started before I was here, and so I also want to thank the previous and existing council for moving forward with this project. It's going to be really important to the community, I believe. And I came in to this process a little bit skeptical and was met with like, anytime I brought up a concern, like those things were addressed, and I was very, very impressed by that. And just impressed by the care that the consultant team brought in, including the community in this process. And yeah, I'm really excited for this project to move forward. I think it's going to be important that the community stay involved in the fundraising and especially in the design process as it moves forward, that we're going to continue, because I think that we can get even more community input in this process. But yeah, really grateful for all the work that you guys have done. This is really amazing.
Thank you.
Anybody have any questions, any thoughts? Thank you very much. Appreciate your input. Yep.
Well, thank you. So right now, our community centers are operated on a 5-weekday, correct?
Yes.
So is this going to drive to a 7-day schedule for our community centers?
So at this time, we do not have that budgeted, so that needs to be part of the conversation with our next budget cycle. Obviously, this building's not going to be constructed for a while yet, so there's time to plan for that. I think there's an equity discussion to be had on that service level for 7 days a week for all of our community centers, not just this one.
Well, I would think like for the weight rooms and the workout rooms and other use that would, as this evolves, it would really require that. Also, in regards to the pool, well, adding a pool here caused the other two centers to say, hey, where's our pool? And how would we absorb that into the budget?
That's actually a question for council to consider.
Well,
So,
I know that pools are problematic for many YMCA's, just the expense of operating a pool. And there was a huge community desire to have a pool here. The Y was unfortunately unable to provide any numbers showing how often the pool was used when it was in operation. It's been out of operation for
2 or 3 years.
2 or 3 years, maybe?
We have provided data from, we have Sports Facilities Company, another team member on ours who is helping to provide data for that maintenance and staffing level of a pool and has provided that for your planning. But yeah, I don't feel that I can answer some of the
Yeah,
questions.
that's just going to be a bump in the ongoing expenses.
Absolutely.
I will say, sort of in response to that, the pool was a very controversial discussion, and I think that a lot of the discussion was around should there be a pool or should there not be a pool. It was like highly, highly requested by the community. Very, very important to this community to have a pool to be able to teach kids how to swim, so we don't run into situations where, you know, kids are caught in the water, can't swim, can't save themselves, things like that. And the discussion around, you know, what it would cost and the maintenance and the upkeep, all of that those discussions were had in the internal meetings as well as with the community. I think that if we were going to talk about, you know, do the other community centers, are they going to want a pool? I can understand the concern. It's a very big barrier to cross because of the cost, the initial cost, as well as the upkeep. Really a discussion that was only possible because of a new project being made here. But if that discussion was to happen with other community centers, that would be a very big discussion with a very big budget attached to it, I think.
If I could add, Mayor and council members, that it's going to be incredibly important that we leverage that pool in a lot of ways for the entire community. And so I've had conversations with Broadlawns, and we'll do so with others as well, medical, for the opportunity to use that pool for rehab and other potential exercise for rehabbing potentially new needs. There's just a plethora of opportunity on the rehab side to utilize that as well.
Wasn't there at one time either discussion of or perhaps actually some work just community-wide? What does indoor and outdoor pools between the city, the school district, the YMCA's, what we really need and what we can justify for expenditures, and with the equity lens on it also.
Yep. Our Parks and Rec Director, Ben Page, sat in on those conversations with the school district and the Y and others that had those types of facilities. So there is that type of information we can share with you as well from that report.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to remind council that there's a lot of work yet left to be done here. That we have our 12 million in city funds identified in the budget for the construction. We've already put in a little over 2 million in design and community work, which is great. But we do need to get to that $15 to $18 million range of a project. So we need some fundraising to occur. We are looking at hiring a fundraiser because we think we can get that 3 or 4 million, but we don't want to leave any opportunities unlooked at or unreally pursued. So we want to make sure we're having that professional look at the fundraising aspects as well. Maybe we can get to that 18 million that way.
That'd be great.
What is the time frame for decision points? I mean,
Yep.
you know, presumably the fundraising is
Yep, if you want.
starting already, and when do we have to make decision points between?
The timeline is about a 1 year towards the fundraising. And so again, that will have local efforts as well as the potential for some private fundraising with assistance from a consultant. And so you'll see there that the spring of about 1 year from now, we should have an idea of how much funds can be expended to start the final design, construction design.
So does that mean we're making the decision based on how well the campaign's gone a year from now?
Yes.
Or- Okay.
And so that is.
That's going to be a hard deadline, so if dollars aren't in, we're going with
Yes,
we're going with what the dollars can provide.
because we need the construction design work done at that point. So it's hard to backpedal from that.
Well, I guess that's another question then. I mean, because some of this is the footprint of the building, right? Like, it's the
Within
size
set,
of the building that you need? I mean, do you have to do all the finished space at once? Or can this be constructed in a way where there are unfinished spaces that could have higher use if dollars were raised later?
That could enter into the equation if we had a partner that needed more time and we thought that risk made sense to go ahead and build out larger. I would tell you the expectation, though, needs to be that the funds are in hand, the programming is understood, because the part of the reason to expand this beyond the $15 million product is because there may be more interest from the nonprofits to utilize this space as well. So it's an understanding right from the start that if the nonprofits want to use this space and they need the building itself to be adjusted, they have to come with funds to help us get there.
And then the daycare facility, is that something? Because
That's in the 18.
That is one of the
That's in the 15
discussions that
million.
we're having.
and I assume we could have a partner for that? Yeah.
I've already had interest discussed, so
Right.
I would hope that we could get there.
Yeah, I mean, that in particular seems like a worthwhile add-on.
So we're not managing the daycare center?
That would not be the intent.
Okay.
No. That is not our business. But it would not be the first city facility to have a
That has-
daycare in it.
Right, no, I
So-
understand that.
That is contracted out by somebody else.
Correct.
Right.
So it's a great opportunity for that neighborhood to provide that space and get a partner to provide the service. And that could be the same for job training, that could be the same for culinary arts if we built a larger kitchen. But we need to make sure we've got the partners that do that type of programming committed to the project,
Financially.
financially and
And
otherwise.
so what is it, you said that hiring a fundraising, I know there's already people on the move doing things right now. So when do we expect, like, very shortly?
Yeah, we've already had some conversations, probably a month, 5 weeks. We
Okay.
can have that decision
Okay.
made.
Because that's critical, because you can see the difference of space is based the money.
Yep.
So the
Yep.
footprint depends on how much money is.
Yep.
It's not like you can add a lot, because you need the footprint to begin with.
Yep.
Right, and with that conversation, so I asked about the property. Do we have the property? Have we purchased it part of the 12 million or 15 million, or is that an additional cost?
It's part of the cost that's been budgeted.
For
but
the
we do-
12 or 15, whatever we
Right.
decide to do?
Right,
But it is in the $12 million budget?
right.
Okay.
To acquire all the land.
Except for
With the
Fifth
exception of
Judicial.
Fifth and Judicial, the building that they have on the north.
Does that state?
Well, right, but the stuff that's outlined that has been shown today.
Right,
We're
correct.
going to acquire all that.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes. Anybody have anything else? Carl, any other thoughts? All right, Indira?
Just wanted to say thank you again.
Thank
All
you.
right, let's keep moving. All right, let's move on. Neighborhood Toolkit.
Mayor, members of the City Council, Chris Johansson, Neighborhood Services Director. About a year ago, the city discussed what more we can do to help the city, help neighborhood associations. So 6 months ago, we did hire our neighborhood outreach coordinator, and today Heather's going to be here to talk about the work she's done over the last 6 months. One of the roles of this position is to help neighborhoods build their capacity, to make them stronger and how better they can work with the city. So with that, I'll turn it over to Heather.
Good morning, Mayor, members of council, Heather Tamiga, Neighborhood Outreach Coordinator. And I'm here today to discuss recommendations for the Neighborhood Association Toolkit Training and Funding. And as we begin today, I'd like to thank the Neighborhood Revitalization Committee for all their thoughtful input throughout this process over the last 3 months. All right, so today's discussion is founded on our mission of strengthening the operational capacity of Des Moines' 51 neighborhood associations. And while there is a long-term vision for the neighborhood associations, I would like to focus today's discussion on phase 1, which is really about stabilizing our neighborhood associations over the next 12 months or so, or at least through June 30th, through the needs assessment, creating a toolkit, and then creating some training and funding opportunities that support the stabilization of the neighborhoods. All right, so my first step was to conduct a needs assessment to determine the priorities. And no matter the method of collecting data, I always asked the same common questions that fell into 3 buckets, which were governance, communications, and outreach. So to collect the data, at the end of April, I will have attended 22 neighborhood association meetings. I've held 20 one-on-one meetings with neighborhood association leaders. We did send out a needs assessment in January, and throughout January and February, we did collect 32 of those needs assessments back. That is a 63% return from our neighborhoods. In addition, I held 7 stakeholder meetings. That includes meeting with members of council, different department and city staff that work with neighborhoods. In addition, I actually met with other community community members who work often with neighborhoods, other nonprofits. And not reflected on the slide, I did research other cities that have robust neighborhood programs and met with their city staff to learn more about their programs and specifically lessons learned as they built out their programs. So with that, I'm just going to try to set the groundwork for today's discussion. One of the first questions that I asked is, what types of education and support does your neighborhood association need? And I think, surprisingly or not surprisingly, I think after meeting with members of council, not surprisingly, the biggest answers came back that neighborhoods wanted to understand grant writing, how to become 501c3s. We've had a lot of long-term neighborhood leaders that are looking to transition out to new leadership, but they're really unsure of how to make that happen. There's also a lot of high interest in making sure that bylaws are up to date, a lot about risk management and insurance, as well as just general legal guidance. The next question we asked is, we tried to evaluate which types of communication tools are currently being used. So as you can see, we do have a high reliance on high-tech, low-cost options for getting out information regarding the neighborhood associations. We have very few that do print or use print media. Those that do not print stated the reason they don't do it is because it costs too much to reach all the neighborhood or all the residents within the neighborhood boundaries. I think some other interesting things were we had some neighborhoods that how they communicate is that they've just cold mailing or email list over years, or they communicate for meetings just using word of mouth. So we're all over the range of how the information goes out to our residents regarding communication. When we asked what type of resources they needed the most in areas of communication, everyone, the biggest consensus was finding volunteers that have communication expertise and know how to use the different mediums, as well as funding for outreach, primarily so that they can try to do better at getting out to all the residents within the neighborhoods. Responses also reflected a desire to learn and navigate language and cultural barriers, and there was a lot of discussion regarding digital equity. The next is I wanted to get a sense of the average outreach expenses that neighborhood associations use, and you can see the print and digital communications average expenses are just over $1,300 annually, while the average spend on events is just under $1,700 annually. I will say in all fairness, I did cut off some of the data on this question because there are some neighborhoods that skewed the data to make it reflect at $4,000 and $8,000. So I wanted to get more of that middle range average on this slide. I think the biggest discovery that I made was how many neighborhood associations where the leaders are actually paying out of pocket for the national nights out, for the picnics, for all the outreach. So those are our volunteer leaders funding the events on their own. One of my final questions were, what were your growth and engagement goals? And I was really happy to see that there was consensus among all 51 neighborhood associations. Like, first of all, of course, they all want to grow their membership, but they all recognize the need for increased diversity. I think that they all recognize that maybe they're not always reflecting the opinions and the thoughts of all the neighborhoods within their boundaries. And so that gave me a really great starting point to know that they could all come to agreement on membership growth and increase of diversity. Finally, I asked a question of self-reflection, and I just wanted to see how neighborhoods felt about themselves. So strong indicates that neighborhoods feel active, engaged, and organized. Holding the line means that they don't really feel like they lost a lot of momentum during COVID, so they didn't really get better, but they didn't really get worse at the same time. Ready for action. Needs help indicated just the need for resources, training, and better understanding. And we did have some that indicated that they're just overwhelmed. Those are leaders who are burnt out, they're ready for resources, and they're ready to transition successfully to the next generation of leaders. So with that, the needs assessments, conversations, and observations from attending the meetings really guided the output for the leadership toolkit. So the toolkit is, the vision is, it's a manual. It's based on nonprofit best management practices, and it will have accompanying plug-and-play templates that neighborhoods could then pull out, plug in their own information, and use, as well as case studies illustrating some best practices that other neighborhood associations have used and seen. So I want to illustrate throughout that, sometimes going through these, especially with our events and outreach, the success that other neighborhoods have had. So this is not one time. I view the toolkit as a working document that will need to be revised year over year, and just as new information comes available. But the idea, again, is for neighborhoods to be able to reach in, grab the resources they need, and use those for their neighborhoods. So on this next slide, over to the right, there is a list of sample templates that we would envision as being the plug-and-play templates. So, for example, I've used some of these already. We have a leadership transition report and leadership transition toolkit that I do have out to a few of the neighborhood associations, and they're kind of beta testing it for me to make sure that, it's a workable document where we can go back and make changes before there's a full release. And I just finalized plug and play articles of incorporation, and next we're going to work on some bylaws and making sure that some code changes are included in those bylaws that neighborhoods could use. So that is the governance piece. Again, the toolkit would come in 3 areas, which is governance and operations, communications, and outreach. So for the communications section, it really expands upon what already exists in our current toolkit. So hopefully we're all aware that there is a current toolkit that the communications department put together, I believe 12 to 18 months ago. So what we want to do is expand upon what is in there. And finally,
Heather, just real quick, as you go back one, and we have a website template already for neighborhood communities. Is that what we've got already?
we do not have a website template already, but we can look at, the discussion's been maybe looking at developing a template that they could maybe use. So potentially partnering with a website providing company that if we help develop a template, then the neighborhoods could go directly to that company, use that template if that's what they'd want to do, but then also receive their training or have that company be their IT support as opposed to city staff.
And then they'll handle all content, correct?
The neighborhoods handle the content.
The neighbors? Okay.
But some of that content might come from the city, as
Right.
departments have different projects and programs, CIP.
Especially
So-
in their neighborhoods.
Right.
This is a critical thing, I think, not to get in the middle of it, that I have found that I think we need to offer that for the neighborhoods to have a centralized, because some are very tech savvy, some, you go to them.
Right,
And
no,
think we need to
that's
have
why, that's why I wanted
I
to,
thought it should be housed on the city, but we can't do that. I believe, I look at the school district, every school has the same template, they just feed the material to it. And that way it is centralized, they have their logo, their color, whatever, but anyway, I think it's a pretty critical element, because a lot of their funding or most money goes towards this expenditure of.
Is
but
there,
they'll still be responsible for putting
Right.
the content on there, correct?
Yes, yes.
is there a reason it wouldn't be housed on the city website?
I was told it couldn't necessarily be, so,
Yeah,
because they're independent of the city.
Right, having access to the software that the city would be maintaining. So there's ways around. It's going to be easier to let it be housed with the private contractor, and we help get the template built. And then that way they can go to them for customizing. We also have some that already have their websites, so we want to make sure we're treating them fairly, that they have the option but not required.
We would still be able to link from the city website though out to the neighborhood association pages?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And we currently do link right now.
Yeah, I was thinking on the Find Your Neighborhood thing, it would already have a link there, right? If they have a
Correct.
website?
Yes.
Okay.
Heather, what does, under phone calls and texts, is CAN?
Oh, the Canned Spam Act.
Yeah.
I think that was
Can you
mostly
explain that?
a note to self to remind that we would have to train on the Canned Spam Act. So the parameters around whether or not you can use somebody's number to make phone calls and texts, and the requirements regarding opting out of that.
Oh, gotcha, okay.
Yeah, some of this, you still get some of my out loud thoughts.
Oh,
throughout
okay.
things.
Well, I thought CAN was maybe an acronym. I know what spam is, but I didn't know what the capital A and the N was. So, okay, gotcha. All right.
And then the print communication, we're just going to provide templates and they're going to put the content in there. Is that correct?
So that's been the discussion, that if they don't already do something in print, that we could provide a simple template that they could use, and again, plug and play into that.
Okay.
Any other questions on, okay. So outreach for me, I think is the most fun, and I think this will be also the most intensive as we go on. So I do see a lot of the items in this outreach for me are kind of what I'm considering phase 2. These are going to be the outward things that we do, a great jumping off point for us to do a lot of training, hold neighborhood roundtables or neighborhood engagement sessions to bring leaders together to talk about best practices. But I do see a lot of items on this list would be taking place after we get the base built up. I think the exception to that is we did really feel strongly that we should do some cultural competency training in this year, phase 1. So with that, again, with a focus on phase 1, just a summary slide of that. You know, the goal really is that by June 30th, that neighborhood associations meet certain standards. The first of which is incorporation. One thing that I've learned throughout this process is that 30 of our 51 neighborhood associations are not incorporated in the state of Iowa, and we would really like to see them be incorporated as nonprofits. That actually offers a lot of great things, including volunteer indemnity. So for those that don't have any directors and officers insurance, that provides some layer of protection. It's also going to assist them with getting some funding easier. The second thing that we would like all neighborhoods to do is file for an EIN number. And again, this is plug and play where I can help walk them through it. So just backing up to the articles, I have an articles template. They would essentially fill that out. I would tell them step for step how to file for the state. I would tell them step to step how to file for their EIN number. And then we also need all neighborhood associations to have a separate bank account. So again, one thing that we've learned throughout this process is we have a few neighborhood associations that don't have any bank account. So the cash on hand is at a neighborhood leader's house, or the bank account is in a treasurer or somebody else's name and their personal name. And we really need to be all that in the name of the organization. And we'd like to have that set up so that when we get to the neighborhood grant funding, that we know that that grant funding is going into an appropriately established account. This also sets them up that if they choose to go on to that 501c3 in the future, that they're already incorporated, that they have their EIN number, and they already have that banking in place. So we're going to try to set them up so if they want to go further down that path, that they're able to do that. The next goal is to ensure that all neighborhoods have their bylaws updated. Specifically, there were some code changes in 2021 that we want to make sure that all neighborhoods have included. Those are specific to electronic voting and holding annual meetings. Hopefully we don't have to do that again, where we go on hiatus for a long period of time, but we want to make sure that the neighborhoods are ready if we do. All neighborhoods should understand risk management strategies. So insurance, how to not say the things that you shouldn't say. Understand how to file for a 501c3 and those ongoing reporting requirements. So since they've asked for the information, that was a number one request. We want to provide that training so they have the information to make those decisions. Understand grant writing principles and how to find funding partners. Understanding best financial management practices. We'd also like to see all neighborhood associations be able to communicate to all households within their boundaries at least once per year. And so that would most likely be through a mailing. And understand the principles of how to hold effective in-person meetings. So the training and funding should support these priorities through a first release of the toolkit and what I'm calling the Jumpstart Guide, which would support these initiatives.
You talked about insurance, so is each neighborhood association required to have some type of insurance coverage?
They're not required to have insurance coverage, but as you know, through the Cessna meeting, that was a high request about how to understand protecting themselves from liability as neighborhood leaders. So through incorporation, there is some limited indemnity coverage, which means that the organization would be named in a suit should something go wrong as opposed to a leader. But I think the next phase is if neighborhoods would want to have directors and officers coverage. One thing we have talked about is working with an insurance partner and just seeing what possibilities are out there so that they could go through a source.
Do we have any idea what the cost is?
It's,
I think it's going to vary on a lot of
depends on the
factors.
size, but it's,
So I don't have an idea of that cost today, but I will by the end of the week. I'm working on having some of those conversations this week.
I think that's where you find one resource that they can go to, that you can try to get a group rate, possibly. I don't know if that can be worked out.
I mean, some of the neighborhood associations don't even charge a fee to be part of it. So
Right.
they don't have $0. We're only going to give them $1,000. It seems like we're asking them, I mean, we're going to give them a toolkit, but we are asking them to do a lot. I can't imagine $1,000 is going to be enough, is my point. That's going to be a challenge, and that's an ongoing cost.
It is an ongoing cost. I will say, from the incorporation standard, that's $20 of what they could use that funding for. We're going to have to go back and look at that directors and officers coverage, but they could certainly use the funding toward that. But I think the bigger concern is the ongoing cost.
Have we had any type of lawsuits or anything filed against any neighborhood associations?
No, I think they were just, the question was elevated to me when I started just out of the concern.
Okay.
My understanding was that like events were easier to hold if the neighborhood association had insurance, then like the event could be held by the neighborhood association under their insurance. Or, like just event insurance particularly, so, like would this not be a thing that every neighborhood association needed to have for, because like if we're not experiencing lawsuits or anything like that, but maybe just like for the ones that are holding events and have like bigger projects?
I know that some of them do have events insurance, so there is one provider that the city uses that I have reached out to, and I just said, do you cover any neighborhood associations? And they do cover 7, and they're all events related. So the larger events, I believe, are covered currently.
So we're not talking about events insurance, we're talking about a separate type of insurance then?
So, well, no, I think we're talking about all insurance. Primarily, my discussion started out with directors and officers coverage, but I do think events insurance is an important part of that equation for those who are concerned.
That's got to be way more than covering, just, if you're serving beer at an event, like some of them do, that coverage has to cost way more than someone that's just going to cover an officer of the board, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
My experience. Yes.
Yeah, it would be.
Yeah, it would.
Because you wouldn't have
Yeah,
liability.
that would be, I can't imagine how much that coverage is, but anyway, okay. That's a completely different, that's a different discussion.
It is, one that we're going to have to wade through.
Heather, for the incorporation, would the city address be the address for those to be received, like the state incorporation? Is that every 3 years? Is that right?
It's every 2 years, it's biennial filing.
Okay, and so there could be a change in leadership in the neighborhood association, so it goes to the previous president or previous secretary. Would it make sense to have all those mailings come to the city just so?
Probably not, because
Well, how the heck are we going to navigate that?
it's the natural way of having nonprofits and 50C1. The leadership is always changing, and I've not heard of concerns about that, so we can sure ask if that's an issue that they're finding.
One thing that I've tried to do is within the leadership transition checklist that I've created is I've written that as a part of the checklist so that if the president is ready to hand everything over to the next president, that that's actually captured as an action item that needs to be handed over and to help create that awareness.
Well, that's great. And Linda and I were at a neighborhood meeting where the secretary had the entire email list, and she quit in a huff. And then so no one else had the email list, and so like they were starting from scratch, and well, some challenges. We'll just leave it at that. So.
And I think that is
A smooth transition is great when that happens.
is when it happens. I know. We're going to try to create the environment in which that could happen.
Okay.
So the training piece of this for the first year, again, I'm only focused on year one right now. The training should support the priority of stabilization of the neighborhoods. Some in-person training would include the onboard, the basics of being an effective board member. I've had several conversations about developing a partnership with the Community Foundation of Greater Des Moines. They have a lot of excellent programs. This is one of them. So helping our neighborhoods become connected with this program. Another in-person training would be the cultural competency piece. I have not worked through that yet, but we do have a lot of resources in-house that I know will deepen my bench for me. The 501c3 considerations, grant writing, risk management, and financial management would all be in-person training sessions that I would recommend. I do have some really good lineup for speakers where I can work with them independently and write those learning objectives. But the thought is to meet bi-monthly or every month, depending on the timing of how all this works out, and to offer these training programs in 2-hour increments. And the reason that we wanted to spread that out is because it's a lot of information at one time, and we want to give neighborhood leaders an opportunity to go back, absorb the information, reflect, and then act. And then the rest of the items on here would be more of what we would consider that toolkit jumpstart guide. So that for me means an early release of the toolkit, so we can get some information out there while we're working to expand the rest of the toolkit. So neighborhood association funding, as you very well know, the budget passed for $52,000 in neighborhood grant funding. So the recommendation for this, we just did the easy math on this one, so that each neighborhood association could get up to $1,000 of grant funding. The idea is that they would apply for this funding in advance, so it's not a reimbursement process. We know from attending neighborhood meetings that a lot of them wouldn't have the capacity to spend $1,000 in order to ask for $1,000 back. So the application process would just include a budget template where they would say, here's how we want to spend the money and here are the goals. And then we would be able to release those funds. At year end, what we'd like to do is marry a reporting process back with the neighborhood's annual survey. So as a reminder, the Neighborhood Revitalization Board does send an annual survey every year to the neighborhoods to ask them for leadership transitions, to validate how many meetings they've had. We would like to incorporate this funding report back. What we really want to know is, did the money meet the goals? Did you use the money in the way that you said you were going to use the money? You know, I'm trying to figure out what roadblocks were along the way as well. So for me, it's more about, did you meet the goals and what roadblocks did you hit? And maybe a little bit less about babysitting how all the dollars were spent, although we would ask for some validation for how the money was spent. So we have 51 neighborhoods, we have $52,000, so this would take out $51,000 of it.
I was just going to ask on recognizing the neighborhoods, because we have the one situation where we have a neighborhood that's very active, but they're not necessarily recognized by us right now.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a transition we can work on?
I think that we will want
Have
to
more
have
discussion?
that conversation.
Okay.
We are not going to want multiple neighborhood associations overlapping
Right.
geographically, so we'll have to work through that carefully.
I think
If that's what she's referring to.
We do currently have that in some areas, with like Beaverdale and Drake overlap a little bit. And I think Waveland and Beaverdale.
I think I have probably the most unique
situation.
Yeah, we're talking about entire.
Yeah.
Portion of it.
Anyway, I just think that, so it goes back to, so we're going to ask for some things to be done in order to get the dollars. Okay.
Yes. So, and those things are, that they should be a recognized neighborhood
Right.
association. We'd like to see them incorporated, have that EIN number set up, as well as that separate bank account, so that we
But
can.
is that a we'd like, you keep saying we'd like to, is that a requirement? I mean, are we going to, if someone has a personal bank account, are we just going to send $1,000
No.
to a personal bank account?
No.
I'm saying we like, so that there's a sense of discussion, but if you were,
On a banking account, I don't see how
I think
there's
we
any
need to.
option.
No,
Yeah.
a lot of these things, I mean, I would say that they would have to meet certain requirements to
They
get
have
the
to have a separate bank
$1,000,
account.
correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
And they have to go through certain training that we're going to require to get the $1,000 is, I mean, I guess that's how I would see, I mean, this happening. I mean, to make sure that the dollars are used correctly, they're going to need some type of training. They're going to need to follow some of the steps of incorporation, EIM numbers. I mean, some of those steps are going to need to be made before or simultaneously as we're giving them the $1,000, correct?
Correct.
Is that how
So,
we, I don't know, I guess that's where I'm coming
Yeah.
from. It sounds like
well,
that's where Josh
I would
is.
never give out money if they didn't have a
Right.
separate bank account.
so
Organization.
no, it's a great question. The incorporation,
Right, that's
the
what I
EIN number, the bank account would need to be set up before we can release the funding, which is why I'm calling this kind of my high priority, is to make sure that I can assist all the neighborhoods in making that happen very quickly so that we can move on to the funding.
But you have may include, okay, go ahead. I won't. Go ahead, finish.
No, it's okay, go ahead.
I think we just make that a criteria.
The criteria.
I mean, the way I see this is like as a prep for like, or kind of like a teaching experience of like other grant applications.
Right.
Is saying like, here's all the requirements to start applying for a grant. Here's how you apply for a grant. Now go do it somewhere else, essentially. Is that kind of like the intention?
I do like that idea. That's somewhat how I've thought about this, is that we're kind of the soft training, and then I can still work with them one-on-one through the process. And like you said, it's a teaching of how to apply for other grants.
Okay.
But I think the criteria, though, is that everyone, first of all, should have a separate bank account, no matter.
Yes.
I mean,
Which they would need for other grants.
yes, for other grants anyway, but before they would get any, yes.
And you have to be a 501c3.
You don't have to be a
To
501c3.
get a grant? No?
No.
Okay.
But to
So
apply for grants usually.
sometimes to apply for grants, you do, but you do have to be recognized as a nonprofit in the state of Iowa, which is what the incorporation would give you.
Okay.
Some will give you grant money without being a full 501c3,
Okay.
but others will not. So again, I think that's part of that education process that we have to provide to the neighborhoods. But I know, for example, the Polk County Betterment Grants do not require our neighborhoods to be a C3,
Okay.
as long as we've recognized our neighborhoods. So there are certainly funding opportunities out there without the C3.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So this last idea of an innovation grant actually came from Councilmember Voss through former Councilmember Tim Urban, I believe. Yes. And I love this idea because I just think it helps navigate or at least drive some of the innovation that we know that our neighborhoods do have. So really the premise of this grant is to fund and support the development of innovative programs that could be replicated throughout the city through other neighborhood associations. So again, the same requirements of the recognition, the incorporation, the bank account. The only other caveat to this one is that they would have to agree to be a mentor and to help other neighborhood associations replicate programs throughout the city. So I could see this, we had the extra $1,000 that was left over of the $52,000. So I could see this as being a grant that could, up to $1,000, or maybe if you had multiple people that didn't need all those funds, you could possibly have multiple grants throughout this. But I love the idea of trying to spark innovation throughout.
When would we know how much money we have left over from the 51 neighborhood associations?
I think it's a great idea, and my most honest answer to you to that is end of the fiscal year.
So it would carry over essentially?
I think that's when we'll know how much we have left over, because I think this first year is just going to be trial and error, to be honest, especially as we're trying to uplift all the neighborhoods to get to this certain place. So I envision that they're going to apply for the grant maybe at different times, or we would know. If there's grant funding going on after this year, if we've proven that that need is there, then I think that we need to get it on a cycle where the funding is available through a certain period of time, and they have to apply for it, like, you know, in this frame. So I don't think I can give you
Yeah.
an honest.
Mayor, if I
Try
could,
that.
this will be a great discussion to have late this fall as we start the next budget cycle, because hopefully many of them will have already gone through the process at that point. And then we know what we need to budget in the next fiscal year, again, late fall this year.
Okay.
The money does not hold over that is not given to the neighborhood associations. Obviously, if they've received their up to $1,000, they get to keep that.
Yeah.
But any unspent funds on the city side do not carry over.
I guess I was just, because we were talking about the innovation grant potentially being more than that $1,000 like allowance for this specific project, and it's like, when would we know if we had more than $1,000 in that pool based on if neighborhoods took their grant or not? Would it just be, like, would we calculate out, like, one neighborhood took 700 and so we have an extra 300? Or would that just be something that we talk about for next year?
I would envision this, I have not asked Heather, I would envision that we will communicate with neighborhoods mid-year for those that have not already applied to get what their intent is.
Okay.
I think we're going to want to know, are you still planning to apply for this $1,000? Because you haven't yet, and you've only got, you know, a few months left type of thing. And if we start to hear back that some of them are not going to take advantage of that, then we could open up the opportunity for more innovative grants that you see here.
Okay.
So going,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
My question was, because I was at a neighborhood meeting where there was discussion, because very few people come. So it was like, maybe we should think about merging, because very close to other neighborhoods. So if neighborhoods would choose to say, okay, at this point, because of the things we need to do, trying to get more members, whatever, if we chose to come together, could those, if two went together, do they get 2,000 for this year to get all their things together and help promote?
So we might need to have more conversation. I had not expected those types of questions. I think we're going to have to communicate that. We're going to have to talk through that.
Yeah,
with
because I mean, that just came up last month at one of the meetings. So I'm just saying, would it be an opportunity then for them to try to merge and really build up the programs and do all the things that we need? Because it's not going to be, they still takes money, so.
So I think, to Connie's point, and some of this discussion has been going on in my ward, where I don't think that the merger, I think they'll all get their $1,000 hopefully before the merger would take place. But going forward next year, I'd like to see go off of population. It would be the only fair thing, because if you have 4 neighborhood groups formed together, and they have, you know, 4 times the amount of, I mean, I just think it should go by population at that point. If we're going to do this annually, I guess we'll have to come up with some type of formula of how much this $1,000 per, I don't even know how that is going to work, but those are the type of things that I know that some of the neighborhood groups that are thinking about merging together, those were some of their questions. Okay, so then do we just get $1,000 and we have, you know, half of the south side?
So again, worthy of more conversation. I want us today, this morning, to see how this gets started, and that the council's agreeable that this is a good way to get started, but that we come back to have those conversations about, is the $1,000 per neighborhood association the right approach? Because maybe there are other metrics that make sense to geographically, population, other situations that may need to change that.
I mean,
Well,
go ahead.
I do think there needs to be a larger conversation about the merger question. I mean, the neighborhood associations that I've seen that are, it tends to be some of the smaller ones that struggle to replace leadership and that are less active, and they're still recognized. And I know we're not going to solve that today, but, I mean, that was something that we discussed early on. I'd like to see some sort of strategy for that, because I don't know that, I mean, I think it creates some of these other problems in terms of we're jumping into with the $1,000 well spent for every neighborhood association, and as we go forward, it only gets bigger. $1,000 is a small amount, but that problem magnifies going forward.
I think in that phase 2 that I outlined, some of that strategic alliance is something that I hope that we could tackle through these conversations. Certainly, I've heard a lot of conversations about the mergers as well. I've been a part of a lot of the conversations that are currently happening in Ward 4. So what I hope to do today, as our city manager said, was to just walk out with a sense of direction to ensure that, you know, we're on the same page, or that I've effectively heard all of the feedback in order to move forward.
Is 1,000 enough to do all I mean, a direct mailing to all the households? I mean, that's has to be 1,000 in itself in some neighborhoods. So, I mean, I guess I mean, we're going to have it. Is our attorneys going to take care of the, you know, some
No,
of
they're
the,
not.
you know,
I just saw the hand.
I'm just saying, so we're going to have to, are we getting an attorney, you know, giving his time to all these neighborhood associations for free? I mean, I just can't imagine that 1,000's going to get us very far to get a lot of this checklist done.
Well, I think the goal was just to start the process, and that's
Okay.
why, you know, even, I know.
There's not a required newsletter either.
Right.
No.
We would just simply want them communicating more. So email, there's other ways to handle that piece of it. I'm sorry, Councilman.
No, I just, you know, this is after, well, Carl and I when I first got on the council, it was like when you start going to 51 meetings for a few of us, it was very evident the difference between them. And I felt it was very important that we had somebody in our city staff that could help coordinate and help give them strength in how we share information. And that's why Heather's been a great addition. I've heard great comments of your information you're giving and the support, because if we want neighborhoods to get stronger, we need to help provide that support. Some struggle, some don't, but it's an ongoing thing that we just need to figure out a better way to build up them and be supportive of them. So I appreciate what you're doing. I support this. Do I think $1,000 is enough? No, not for all the stuff that they'll have to do if we really get going. But at least they'll have the mechanism to go out and probably try to get more members and raise more money within their own organizations, so.
Okay.
Heather, now that you've been on board since what, November, maybe?
November, yeah.
Yeah. So we have neighborhood associations that meet monthly, we have bi-monthly and quarterly, and it's all. Do you have a sense of what's the right, I mean, there are groups that meet monthly and they only get 2 or 3 people there, so like,
So I think it depends on the business at hand and what they're trying to move forward. I certainly know some neighborhood associations have a lot going on right now, so the monthly meetings might make sense for them. I'm going to encourage all neighborhood associations to do some outreach and some surveying to figure out the best meeting times for the residents that they serve. I think that there could certainly be some tweaks about the timing of how often they meet.
okay. Thanks.
Indira, did you have something?
Yeah, I just think my thoughts looking at all of this that you've put together is that it's going to be really easy for some neighborhood associations to just jump into this and get everything worked out, or maybe they already do have some of that stuff. And then for some of the other ones, like the ones that said struggling in your survey, right? That this might be really hard to, you know, do all of these things when they're already kind of feeling overwhelmed. Overwhelmed was the word. But I think that this is a really good, structure, right? It's a really good outline. And then taking this to the neighborhood associations and finding what works for them immediately and what steps would need to wait for later, I think is going to be, in my view, like the best way to go about it. Just, you know, having this structure that people can, you know, take the pieces that are going to work for them right away, to solidify and stabilize, while then we move forward with outreach and, transitioning leadership and things like that.
It's going to be an interesting process,
Yeah.
but I'm here, so I'm up for the challenge.
You're very competent. You'll do great.
Thank you.
Heather, you and I haven't had a chance to talk, but I really like the work that you've done since November. It looks like we're headed in a direction. I will tell you that for some of us that have been watching neighborhood associations since begin to form and remember the Fran Kunzes, the Nadine Hogates, and the Alice Rodines that started this whole thing, it's interesting as you spend time with each of these neighborhoods, and having, quite frankly, been to every one of them when we had 58 of them, and some have consolidated over time, but they all came together for different reasons. Some of them up in Drake, they have a number of issues, but among one of them is they've got a whole neighborhood gardening program where they've got a whole set of people that are coming together to do some of that stuff in addition to some of the other things. There's others, I remember up on the River Bend, they had issues about safety, public safety in that neighborhood, and some strange things that were going on back in the 80s and 90s. And they all came together to try to work on some of those issues, which was a safety issue. Other areas was infrastructure, about sidewalks, about street sewers. As Joe has pointed out, some of the places on the south side, some of them came together because there weren't curbs, gutters, and sidewalks along some of those streets on the south side. It was still like a rural kind of an area. So, they communicate to us, and we try to respond as elected officials to deliver some of the stuff that they want. But it's been interesting to watch all that different input in the different levels of engagement of different neighborhoods. You go to the South Side neighborhood and Southwestern Hills, they'll get big turnouts, but they're quarterly? And they show up and they'll have 50 to 100 people. And as everybody pointed out, go to some of these others, you get 3 or 4. But it doesn't mean that they don't have purpose and they don't have it. It's just trying to get that communication out, which I think this whole plan to get input from the people that live there and work there and see how we can get a more direct communication they can, not only with their neighbors and their businesses, but also with us, so that we can respond to them. So thank you for your work, and I want to see at least twice the production between now and November, and we'll have your 1-year anniversary. So
All right, challenge accepted. Thank you.
Let's move on. We got noise control permits, talking about the 900 block of Mulberry. I think there must be something going on down there.
We have an opportunity in front of us, but a question for council. Sue Ann to go through this with us.
I'm good. Mayor, members of the council, Sue Ann Donovan, I'm the Neighborhood Services Deputy Director. We're going to talk a little bit about noise control at 900 Mulberry, which is the former Des Moines Social Club. So a little bit about property history. Of course, it was originally the Fire Station 1. In December of 2012, the property was rezoned to C3A and C3. 2013, title transferred to the Des Moines Social Club. The development agreement showed a potential outside venue. Certificate of occupancy was issued for assembly use December 31st of 2013. The last sound permit issued for an outside event at that location was the March of 2019. In December of 2019, the property was rezoned to DX1, and that was part of the citywide rezoning, the comprehensive rezoning. And then the social club announced that it was closing in April of 2021. So right now, the noise control permit that would be allowed at 900 Mulberry would be allowing 8 concerts a month at a level of 85 dBc when measured 50 feet from the sound equipment. Now, measuring 50 feet from the sound equipment,
8 concerts a month?
8 concerts a month, yes. So 50 feet from the sound equipment at that location is really anything within the confines of the outside space. There's hardly any separation out there between speakers and the property line. They can also have background sound permit with a limit of 65 dBc. They do have a rooftop patio on top of the rear building, and that affects then noise from the rooftop patio. Previously, there were a lot of complaints about noise. Staff had attempted at that point to work with the Des Moines Social Club through negotiation. We never did issue citations, or sound readings were never taken. We just were trying to negotiate while they're in business.
Did Des Moines Social Club have that ability to have 8 events per month?
Yes, they did. The development agreement was never amended to allow outside concert, but we gave them permits for the 85 dBc 8 times a month.
8 times a month?
Yep.
Okay, so that's what we
That's what we
operated on
operated
previously.
under.
And when were the complaints? Were they before 11 o'clock? Were they before midnight? I mean, were they at 9 o'clock at night?
There were complaints in the afternoons, there were complaints in the evenings, there were complaints when there were bands outside, yes.
Can you explain the DX1 zoning? I don't know it off the top of my head.
It's a mixed use for areas in the city that we want, sort of a mixed use, residential, commercial mixed use. So just to give you some background, this area used to be zoned the C3, C3B, and that was mixed use under the old ordinance, and it was downtown only, were the mixed use districts. When we rezoned the city, mixed use districts are now scattered on nodes and corridors everywhere, and a mixed use could be an MX1, RX1. I mean, there's just a ton of what we call mixed use now scattered throughout the city that could be given an 85 8 times a month, and we got to correct that. That's something that is unintentional.
Okay. But the D, is that downtown mixed use or?
I think it is downtown,
Okay.
but then there's an RX, which is
Yes.
a residential mixed use.
And
in
that has
Drake.
the same, that's what
Yeah.
you're talking about needs to be corrected?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sue Ann, the DBC, does that measure the base?
Correct.
Okay, so the C is the base
Correct.
measure, okay.
Yes, and I have Sergeant Stroop is here, and he's our sound expert, and when we get into more of the slide on the sound readings that we took, I want him to come up and tell you what those readings mean to real people, because he's much better at it than I am.
That's good, because I have no idea what 85 dBc is going to sound like, sitting in a living room or...
Well, if you say 65 dBc is talking,
65 is talking,
85 is double that, because
kind of like a room full of a bunch of Italians on Easter.
something like that.
Yeah, that's probably pretty loud.
So, as I was explaining, when we changed the zoning district, we changed it recently, and we'd had districts for noise control in East Village, and we did some downtown areas to allow those to have the 85. What we didn't realize is the ordinance actually said mixed use, and it didn't come out, and so that was an unintended loophole that allows this site to have 85 dBc at 8 times a month. When we did it, we did not intend for this to be an event venue. It just got a loophole sort of by mistake.
But they're not asking to do it 8 times a month, are they?
We'll get that.
Okay.
So, like, we added areas downtown in East Village to have 85 dBc and intended that the rest of the city did not allow 85 dBc outside of those areas, because this wasn't intended, or other areas in the city to be treated like Court Avenue's entertainment district. So we were asked to take sound readings to establish the ambient, and these were taken on 9th Street on March 9th and March 15th, and the ambient noise on 9th was about 73 with the max at 84. And again, I'll let Sergeant Stroop come up and explain more of how that ambient affects people. We did hold a public meeting on March 28th. There were approximately 30 people in attendance, residents of the condos, the developer, Des Moines Social Club transition team, staff members from Neighborhood Services Economic Development, and we did have 2 people from the Downtown Neighborhood Association at the public meeting. So the feedback we got from residents is that past concerts made it impossible to be in their homes. Property needs to be controlled to limit the noise. Suggested that sound be pointed away from the residential units. Believe 8 concert events a month is too many. They wanted a sound study to determine what levels would work on the property. They feel that the ambient noise readings were taken at the wrong location, and they have significant investment in their homes, and that would like that to be taken into consideration. They have stated that the city needs to protect residents who have invested over $17 million in their homes across the alley from 900 Mulberry. They aren't speculating about the impact of amplified music. They lived with it, and it isn't right to have homeowners should be forced for their property to accommodate amplified music next door, as they have been in the past. Developers' feedback was they will remove the stage. They're constructed, social clubs constructed a stage out there. They're going to take it out, but they still would hold outside amplified events. They're not sure what they'll do with the front building. They plan to lease the rear building of the firefighters union. And that building, they would have office space, but they also want to hire an events coordinator in order to run events out of that space. And they would then lease the outside and the interior and exterior for events with amplified sound. The developer says if they're not allowed to have adequate sound, their deal will fall through. They claim it is an outside event space and should be allowed to continue that function. And they need 90 dBc to hold concerts outside. They have come back with a suggestion. I got this after the PowerPoint was put together. Their suggestion is that they be allowed to have 6 permits a year, 6 a year at 95, 12 a year at 91, 18 a year at 85. If we figure that there's 96 times during the year that you could have outside sound, but we know that summer is probably the only time you're going to have it. That reduces that to 48. So their request is 40 times a year at these various levels.
But also ending at 11 p.m. on Friday and Saturdays, correct?
I believe that's what they said, yes. 11
And
p.m. on,
10 o'clock on weeknights.
I thought it said 12:30.
11 p.m. on Fridays and Saturdays is
Right.
what they've said.
Did they change it from 12:30 a.m.
That's what they're suggesting, is pull it back from 12:30 to
to 11? Okay.
So we did take sound readings on April 7th to determine ambient, determine how the neighboring dwellings were affected. We did have one unit that we could use for both inside and outside readings, inside and then outside on the patio. We took readings at 85, 90, and 100. And then, this is the table, and I'm going to let the sergeant talk about sound.
That's great.
Mayor and Council, Sergeant Stroop with the police department, and I opened my mouth one time and became the sound expert. I'm actually going to take you back to the slide where we had the ambient readings and start there. As Councilmember Gatto said, some of these numbers probably don't make much sense to the average person. So you'll see 3 readings up there for each sound reading: the LC EQ, LCF max, and LC peak. And I want to explain what those mean, because we're trying to paint a picture of a very dynamic situation using static numbers. And sound is it's a dynamic thing, And there's a lot of mitigating factors when we talk about it. So when you see a reading of LCEQ, the easiest way to explain this is with a speed analogy. We take a reading for a certain amount of time. And of course, there's peaks and valleys to that reading, especially when you're playing music, okay? Music goes up and down. There's very different frequencies. Each instrument is playing in a different frequency range, so on and so forth. So what the meter is doing is converting all those peaks and valleys over that course of time to what an equivalent sound energy would be received if you just received a constant tone, okay? While the meter is taking a reading, we use what's called the fast reading, which is every 1/8 of a second it's taking a reading. So max is an average, is the highest recorded average for any given 1/8 of a second during that reading. We can more or less throw that reading out. LC peak is the absolute highest peak value that the meter read during the time period we took the reading. We generally take our readings for a minute. That's what we recommend when we train the officers to use the meter, is to take a reading for at least a minute. Also, when we talk about sound, we can't talk about sound without talking about distance. Because Sue Ann said, 65, we're easily exceeding 65 in here. At least the distance I'm talking to you is in excess of 65. Someone in the back of the room, obviously not getting the same amount because of the distance. However, there'll be a lot of math today. Sound degrades using what's called the inverse square rule. So we lose 6 decibels every time the distance doubles, but that's additive, okay? So if I'm playing a sound where I'm standing, and it's, say, 100 decibels, and 50 feet away, it's 80 decibels. If you go another 50 feet away, you lose 6 decibels, and bear with me, I should have been in bed an hour ago, so this math is going to be fun. That means 50 feet beyond where the meter is it's going to drop down to 72, okay? Now we have to double that distance again to get another 6 decibels. So we have to go another 100 feet beyond that to get another 6 decibels down. So now we're at a total distance of 150 feet. So it's an exponential. So sound degrades initially pretty quick, but very slowly. If any of you remember the chart I made for you when we were discussing the Lauridsen Amphitheater, sound at Lauridsen is pretty much by the time above the ordinance at the edges of the city, right? Because when that distance starts doubling and doubling and doubling, it starts to degrade slower and slower and slower. Well, where we had the speakers set up for this test, we were in the middle of the courtyard there at the fire station, old fire station. From there to the edge of the neighboring property is 30 feet. So there's really no distance for the sound to degrade when we're talking about this program here.
Is this the property directly across the street to the north?
No, we're directly to the west across the alley.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's the old
Look.
yeah, the magazine. Yeah, Look magazine building. Thank you.
Gotcha.
And of course, they all have balconies that are on the edge of the building. So
That face the courtyard.
yes, and I know one of the suggestions. I apologize if I'm getting all over the place.
Sorry.
That's all right. One of the suggestions Sue Ann read was that residents recommend the sound be pointed away from their building. That wouldn't make any difference. Sound comes out in a cone or a bubble shape, and so you could face the speakers up, down, left, right. A distance of 30 feet, it's not making any difference. So I wanted to get back to my speed analogy here. So if you drove from here to Chicago and you told me how long it took you to get there, I could do the math and figure out what your average speed was. So that's what that LCEQ number is. Now I know during your trip, you went faster sometimes, you went slower other times. That LC peak is the absolute fastest speed you would have traveled. And if you're going to get a ticket for speeding, you can't argue with, in court and say, well, my average speed over the trip was, So when we're talking about ambient readings, the LCEQ reading is actually pretty decent at painting us a picture of what the ambient noise level is on average, right? Because it's an average, it's telling you average what you're getting. But that peak is the loudest noise that you would hear. And so, again, Sergeant McKinney and I took these readings. I took some at night, he took some during the day. That LC peak of 96 and 99 is, I was standing on the corner of 9th and Mulberry next to the viaduct, and as a car drives by me, the tire noise on the road, maybe the muffler, that's what's hitting 96 decibels, but that's 3 feet from where I'm standing. If we go back.
What is it at the?
So now I'm going to go to that slide real quick, because we did tabulate that. And we did this at roughly 2 in the afternoon. Okay, inside the unit, you can see, kudos to the architect and the materials they picked out for those glass walls. It does a very good job of sound attenuation. 73.9 inside the unit was the peak, so that's when cars would be driving by. Outside, 85. Oh, ambient and courtyard, sorry.
Wait, go back.
Yeah.
I'm confused.
Yeah, I guess I got hit.
Yeah, you lost me there. So that's inside the unit? Or no?
That's got to be outside. It's much, much louder. The other thing Sue Ann pointed out to you, and I'll reiterate, is so what do these numbers mean when we're talking decibels? Because, you know, an increase of 2 or 3 probably doesn't sound like a big deal. Every time we increase 10 decibels, that's twice as loud. So our current residential ordinance for single-family duplexes, you know, residential area is 60 decibels during the day. So that means music that's at 85 decibels is 2.5 or 4.5 times, 6 times louder, excuse me, than what the ordinance allows. So every 10 you're multiplying by 2.5 times 4. I've seen a lot of quizzical looks.
That didn't make sense.
60 to 70 is twice as loud. 70 to 80 is twice as loud again. 80 to 85 is half as loud as that. So you do that math.
So I get that piece. I don't get what this chart is telling us.
I'm going to go back.
I can't make sense of the chart. So it's ambient at 73 on the corner, and was at the same time, was it 69 in the courtyard, or you did a calculation because you're
No.
further away? Like
I now see that cell. I didn't pay attention to it because it looked like a header to me. So ambient at Southwest 9th, on the corner of Southwest 9th, the average is 73.3. Me standing in the courtyard, we're losing 4 decibels.
Right, okay.
Now on the peak, we're losing 10 decibels, so it's twice as quiet inside the courtyard than it is on Southwest 9th. No, the ambient readings we took was just us standing there.
Right, I'm looking at like the 90 pink, 90 music, 100 pink, 100 music. Like,
Yep. So that's actually playing music. So when you see pink, to make this as scientific as we possibly could, we played what's called pink noise. And I played, Councilmember Shoemaker, you weren't here for this, but we did the Lauritsen Amphitheater presentation. If you all remember, that sounded like TV static. But what pink music is it's playing every frequency audible to the human ear at the same time. So it sounds like static, but it's a way to test sound equipment, and it's fair because you can say like, well, this genre of music is heavier on treble, this genre of music is heavier on bass. Well, if we play pink noise, there's no argument, you know, everything levels the same. So what we did is the sound company that was hired was kind enough, they brought their own meter. We made sure that our meters were matching each other. And then I had him, the sound engineer, turn the sound up to our desired reading at his meter, which was about 20 feet from the speakers, where they would have their soundboard set up. If y'all remember the term front of house from our previous presentations, front of house is the music industry speak for wherever the sound mixer's sitting during a concert. And we figure in that courtyard that right where the old radio tower is about where they would set up front of house. And so that's where his meter was set up. And then we went up to the unit. So I had him target a sound level reading for the peak, mind you. I wanted him to hit a peak of 80, was it 85, 95, and 100? Is that right, Suzanne? 85, 90. 85, 90, and 100. And then we tried to see what we got inside the unit and outside the unit. So I'd like to start outside the unit first. And as you can see, it's really, I would actually disregard the fact that the peak is higher than the, 85 pink, you see a 91. Really what's that mean is we were hitting 91 because we were talking, if he had his meter set up 30 feet from the, or 25 feet from the speakers and we're 30 feet away on the balcony, we're hearing the same thing, right? So really what that means, it's really hard to hit the peak, you know, because the music fluctuates up and down. But there's basically, what this story tells is if they're out, if the residents are out on their balconies on that east side of that Look Magazine building, they're hearing whatever the concert's playing. There's no reduction in sound. There's just not.
No, they're right on top of it.
Yeah, you're not going to get any reduction in sound.
Which one is inside and which one is outside?
The second one is outside,
Yeah.
the first one is inside.
Yeah.
Can we go to the ones where they're inside their unit? Sure.
Yeah, this one. Ambient noise.
Oh, whoops, I pushed down.
Do it backward. And so you were saying before that the peak we can disregard, the max we can disregard, and we're just looking at the EQ?
The max is probably the one that doesn't mean much to us right now.
Can I speak to that?
I don't know the protocol.
Generally, no.
They did point out, or wisely someone pointed out, hey, let's turn on the air conditioner. That's why you see an ambient with the fan. The only problem I see with that is their fan, the fan in the unit we were in jumped up from 60 to 70 decibels, which means the fan is twice as loud as when the fan's not on. And initially that sounds great, but what I would caution is that what that means is when their air conditioner cycles off, the music's going to appear to be twice as loud.
So inside the unit, the pink is all the different sounds.
Yep.
It's about 55. Is that the maximum is what they're hearing?
I would focus on the peak readings right now for what we're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah. So if they're playing 85 pink noise inside, they're getting about 10 decibel reduction. So it's about twice as quiet inside their unit as what's being played outside. And again, that's a testament to the construction.
That's like occasionally, right? The peak is just like every once in a while?
It's as fast as the guitar player strumming their strings or as loud as the singer's yelling at that particular point. I mean, it's the absolute peak. And that's why we talk about it's tough to get, when we're talking about music, right, it's changing all the time. And my difficulty with, because not surprisingly, when I go take sound readings, the person who we're taking the reading on likes to focus on the EQ reading, the average, because that's normally much more in their favor. If I was standing outside your house beating on a drum.
The peak would be every time you hit the drum?
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you called the police to deal with this, and I said, well, yeah, but when he's not hitting the drum, it's ambient, so you're only getting an average, you know, between those two. I don't think you'd be happy with me telling you had to deal with it because the average between him not hitting me not hitting the drum and me hitting the drum was somewhat lower, right?
So if music is playing constantly for the full minute that you're taking the reading, the EQ reflects that?
No, the EQ is a mathematical formula that if we could convert that song into a constant noise, like a constant tone,
Okay.
that's what the sound energy your body would receive. That's why I said it's good for painting a picture of what the ambient is, but when you're talking about music, I don't think the EQ gives you a good story because it's leveling out those peaks and bringing up those valleys. But what's annoying you? The peaks, right?
Okay.
The loudest noise is what's bothering you. Just like the speeding analogy, right? You're going to get caught for going this far above the speed limit, not anywhere in between that peak
Okay.
and valley. So we did play some music, and again, you're seeing about a little more than the 13 decibel reduction, which would be just a little under twice as loud or twice as quiet when we're inside. But I just really think it's important to point out that given the distances involved, the patio is hearing exactly what's being played. And that needs, I would assume, needs to be taken into consideration when setting the noise level inside or at the property.
Did you you probably didn't take a reading when out front there in the north, when Malo's patio is full of people and everyone's talking or everyone's doing that. What is the reading then?
We don't take sound readings for the unamplified human voice because the code doesn't require us to.
So it's only for music?
Only for amplified music.
Okay.
So
not background music playing out on the
So,
patios?
yeah, if your neighbors were having a party outside and everybody weren't playing any music, it was just loud talking, that's covered under our disturbing the peace and quiet ordinance. So it's still a city ordinance, but it's just enforced differently.
So if they have 100 people and they're all in that courtyard and there's no music and they're all talking?
We may take a reading if it's to be illustrative, but it's not part of the enforcement mechanism, as in, like, it's not going to decide whether or not we wrote a ticket or arrested somebody for disturbing the peace and quiet.
So previously.
It's not a fact of the crime, sorry.
Sorry. So previously, the social club was getting permits for 85 decibels, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so are we saying that we expect that they were around that 85 decibel range when they were playing music, so we'd be looking at the 85 music readings of what they were doing?
Did we ever take sound readings for the social club?
No, we didn't take sound readings for the social club.
So they could have been violating their permit?
Yeah, I think they probably were. We just never took sound readings. We were trying to negotiate with
Did you get
them to
complaints?
get them to voluntarily reduce it.
Because of the complaints you received?
Because of the complaints we received, yes. I can do the rest
So
of the...
what they're asking for with this, is it more or less than what we had with the social club?
They are asking for 6 permits a year at 95 decibels, 12 a year at 91, and 18 at 85. I'll go through the rest of the presentation so
Okay.
so we can get through comparisons.
Sorry, what was the highest, 91?
95.
95? So I guess I didn't really get a feeling for, we have this 90 music would be 73 decibels. I didn't get a feeling for like what that sounds like on the human ear, what the experience is like when you're in your home.
It's loud.
Because we said 65 was just like talking.
Right.
So 73 is
Double.
that.
Yep.
Okay.
Right. No, go for it.
I think another really important thing to point out that I meant to go over earlier is our ears perceive different frequencies as being louder than other frequencies. So your smoke alarm in your house, the NFPA standard for smoke alarms is 85 decibels at 5 meters from the, which is a long ways away from it. But do any of you want to stand underneath the smoke alarm without plugging your ears? I mean, it's just piercing, right? It's very high frequency. Our ears perceive that as being louder. If I played for you 85 decibels of like a 60 hertz bass note, it would be rumbling our tables at 100 decibels, but it wouldn't be hurting your ears because the sound pressure level is the same, but it's hitting your ears at a much your ears are getting vibrated so much more slowly, it doesn't hurt like the high-frequency one does. So when we talk about those peaks that we took the readings of at Southwest 9th with the cars driving by, tire noise is about 1,000 hertz, which is the average human voice frequency. And it's a constant noise, right? It's just, as it goes by. It doesn't change at all. It's very constant noise. So when people are playing music, the experience of what's bothering you is going to be so much more different than tire noise. For instance, I live near I-235. The ambient noise level at my house is actually pretty high because of I-235. But I can tell you every time a motorcycle drives by, and when there's events going on where they're playing amplified music in my neighborhood, it bothers me much more differently than the sound of I-235, because the I-235 noise is a constant, kind of a background noise, white noise. If anybody sleeps with a white noise machine or sleeps with a fan on it, it's comparing apples and oranges as far as that white noise versus dynamic music that's playing. Sorry, that was the one thing I wanted.
Thank you.
So just to make a comparison, we had a lot of talk about East Village and noise pollution in East Village. And so what was decided to protect residents there was no amplified sound on patios within 250 feet of a residential occupancy. Street closure locations are limited to the major streets. And in the East Village, all amplified sound must end by 10 p.m. They are allowed to have on patios the background sound at 65 dBc. So here's the definition of noise disturbances that are prohibited. Again, it's the intensity of the background noise, whether it's usual or unusual, the origin of the noise, proximity to sleeping facilities. So when we talk about noise disturbance is also prohibited under the ordinance, and we can write and take people to court for a noise disturbance. So I'm just pointing out that some of these very things in our own definition would be prohibited next to a residential unit. So one of the considerations that the council can take into account are we are going to amend the code to take out all references citywide to mixed uses. This allows us then to take venues and decide what their sound level should be per venue, like we've done in the past. So Lordson has its own, Breton has its own, Botanical Center has its own, Riverview. Each one of these we've taken and analyzed where it is, what the impacts on the residents are going to be, and set the limits accordingly due to the mathematical formulas of noise control so that we get it right. Now, we have tweaked things. We don't think Lordson is correct. We tweaked East Village. We tweaked Breton when it was having problems with being too loud for residents in that neighborhood. We believe that we should continue to tweak the sound ordinance based on where the venue is and what kind of sound is acceptable in that area. So that would be my recommendation. If council wishes to add some sound to this venue, we would suggest 85 dBc ending at 10 p.m. Again, it doesn't matter where the stage faces, but we would like them to put in a sound buffer that might direct some of that sound away from the building, although I doubt that's probably going to help because it'll just bounce off the wall and bounce back over, with a limit of 65 dBc on the rooftop patio or on the lower patio without the 85 dBc, and maybe allow one amplified event a month in the courtyard. This is where we're going to ask for guidance from the council and any further questions you may have.
Sue Ann, the group that is proposed to buy the building, they're taking the stage away from the courtyard area, but there still might be amplified events on the courtyard. Is that correct?
They've said the stage will go away, but they wish to have amplified music in that courtyard without the stage.
Okay. And then the courtyard sound noise is different than the rooftop of what was the theater that the local Union 4 is proposing to buy.
My suggestion is that the patio, or the rooftop patio, not have anything above ambient 65 dBc up there. I think they would like to have concerts up there.
Is it concerts or like a DJ or like a reception type deal, or is it actual live music playing?
I think they want both. And to us, it doesn't matter what the type of amplified music is, whether it's a concert or a DJ, it's all the same. I don't think they're going to have AC/DC or, anything. I mean, they're not going to get that, but there are local bands that can be, at that level. Receptions can be, with DJs, can be quite loud.
Right. Live music maybe is a little bit different than background noise. I mean, there's differences in terms of who's more likely to violate where you're going to get the problems, no?
No.
Or do we not keep track of that?
We do not want to keep track of the type of music based on complaints. That's not going to get us where we need to be. It has to be the level of the music, because I'll tell you what, a country band right now is heavily based. The modern country bands, they're heavily bass oriented. Same with some of the, other like blues bands are heavily. I mean, I'm not going to say that one type of music creates more of a problem than another, because it's all the same. It's just sources of music and hitting the levels. And
Well, I don't think he was talking about the kind of music. I think he was talking about how it's
Live or recorded.
live or
recorded.
from a DJ.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's whatever kind of music.
I don't think it matters if it's live or a DJ. They still have to keep the sound level at
I
85.
understand. I was just saying that I think there's perhaps more likelihood that a live band is going to go above the sound violation. It's harder to control if you're a venue, your performers and what they do in the moment versus, I think a venue can control.
In my
DJ.
opinion, and from my experience, DJs are just as loud and uncontrolled as a live band. We've had as many we have had as much problems with DJs on patios as we have with bands.
It's a matter of the amplification, right?
It's the amplification.
Because it's not going to get louder than it's amplified to, right?
The amplification is where we're trying to keep it at the level that's acceptable, and a DJ can turn up their sound just as loud as a band can.
Well, they can turn it down faster, too.
They can.
So,
Yep.
And so would an acoustic group, would that acoustic guitar, can that work or not?
Without amplification?
Yeah, without amplification.
Yeah, it probably could, yes.
And that would be within that wouldn't like violate the noise ordinance.
Only if it's so loud that it becomes a noise disturbance.
It would be helpful for me to maybe hear, because I had not been reached out to prior to this, so I don't know the exact proposal from the developer or what they are looking for. I mean, I will say, I don't know that anything above the 85 is something that I'm willing to consider, but if we've previously had events at 85, I guess I'd like a better understanding of the range of things that are being proposed and what we're looking to. So, Mr. Mayor, if we want to make an exception and let them come up and try and explain it so that we all have the benefit of understanding.
That'd be fine.
When was these condos constructed? Was it
When
when it was part of the fire station, or so the fire station was there when they put these condos in?
Yes.
Okay.
how often did the fire trucks go out?
Good morning, Mayor and council members. Todd Malang, I'm the developer here, and I'm going to let, I didn't know anything about any of this music information. I'm not in the music business or the event space as well, and so I've been learning on the go. It was brought up towards the end of our due diligence period that the property was presented as an event space, live performance. We were marketing it a little bit to some of that type of use, and then we found out that the zoning ordinance has changed and the sound ordinance was a little bit in question. So we've been diving into it a little bit. The transition board hired Darren, who's going to maybe give a little bit more information on sound. He was the other half at the property when they did the sound testing. So I'm going to let Darren sort of talk a little more about sound.
Mayor, members of the council. So to start off, in full disclosure, I was asked to come here by the developers. I am not on the payroll of developers. I am not part of the plan to be on management or any part of the Des Moines Social Club. So I'm simply speaking here as someone who's been in the live event industry for 15 years. I hold 2 degrees in engineering, so I'm coming from a scientific background. I spoke in front of most of you about the Lords and things. So my skin in the game is not so much I need it to be as loud as possible or no concerts at all. My skin in the game is for me to be able to do my job as a live sound engineer. The measurements that are listed in the ordinances need to make sense and they need to be tenable. You can't put a 15-mile-an-hour speed limit on a highway, and you can't put an 85-mile-an-hour speed limit in a residential area. So a couple things that I did want to hit really quickly regarding the events that did happen at the social club. I was not at many of them. My gut check, again, this is based on just kind of 15 years of experience and knowing the kind of events that happen there. My gut check is at front of house, those events measured probably about 110 to 120 decibels at that location. Those are the kinds of events that, based on other events that I've done, that would be kind of my thing. There are also a couple of notes that I would like to bring a little light to the science a little bit more. There are a couple of items that the officer mentioned. One thing being that sound dissipates equally spherically, and that is true if you are using an ideal source of sound, but speakers are designed to throw sound in a certain direction. Generally speaking, the lower in frequency you go, the more spherical it is, but high frequency from speakers, if you point a speaker that way and stand behind it, it will sound a little muffled. So there's that note that I would like to put in there. The other note is that if the ambient noise level for the ordinance is at 65 decibels C, so I was the company that was hired, like you mentioned, to provide the sound equipment. I was measuring the courtyard with birds chirping and just traffic noises. The ambient noise measurement was 70 to 72 in the courtyard. So again, there is a very good merit to the argument that background traffic noise feels and sounds different and is annoying essentially differently than live music. The meter cannot discern between a car noise and an acoustic guitar. So if 65 decibels dBc is the suggested limit for the courtyard, they would violate the sound ordinance by having an empty parking lot. So I want to kind of bring that point to light.
And you tested it while you were there in the courtyard?
Yes.
At 2 o'clock in the afternoon?
2 o'clock.
And it read 72?
Yep. So I had a meter that was constantly running. When we radioed each other, okay, set the music to 85, set it to 85. I was reading 85 at my meter. Well, they took their measurements, stopped the music, 70 to 72. When the train came through, I metered. I took a video. I don't actually have the number, but I want to say it was around 85 to 90. But it was. Yeah. So the train itself, and again, this is something that the meter doesn't know. The meter is simply just a measurement of the change in sound pressure level. And as another note to the measurement itself, I do have to speak to the peak reading. So if you'll allow me a brief demonstration drawing here. So the human ear does not hear instantaneous sound. The human ear hears vibrations. Vibration is a function of time. There needs to be a certain amount of time for a vibration to happen, otherwise you are looking at a singular point on a graph. So peak is a measurement of that singular point. So if we are talking about a kick drum, the waveform of a kick drum is going to have a very big initial peak and then die off like that. Now, the human ear does average over time, which is why in the industry the fast reading is usually the most common reading to use to determine the volume of something.
Was that the LFC max? The fast?
Yes.
Okay.
So there is a very, very big difference between the maximum reading and a peak reading. So maximum is the absolute maximum of that 1/8 second that he mentioned, the maximum value of that 1/8 second time averaging across that minute of reading. So it's averaging every 1/8 of a second. The maximum of all of those averages is the maximum reading. The peak is that absolute point at the very top of that kick drum right here. Now, again, what he said makes sense, is like, well, we want to have the maximum reading, but if we also have, say, a snare drum that hits, the snare drum may, go down to start depending on what orientation you're in. And this line, by the way, represents your ambient level. So the snare drum may hit going down, the next snare drum may hit, and the waveform may read going up. So if I'm hitting kick drum and snare drum at the same time, wouldn't be a very good musician, but that's what I'm doing. The two may, depending on where they line up on that waveform, may peak twice as high. If my snare drum, if I'm slightly off, this valley may hit that peak and may cancel it out on the waveform. The two are still going to sound exactly the same in volume because I'm hitting them at the same time. So the peak measurement is the absolute instantaneous maximum, not the absolute time averaged value. So from a scientific perspective, no other city uses peak. No sound engineer uses peak because you have what's also called crest factor, is a term that's used. Crest factor is the difference between your peak and your time averaged reading. Live music has a crest factor of about 20 to 30 decibels, sometimes even higher. What that means is if you play pre-recorded music, as was mentioned over here, if you play pre-recorded music that sounds 90 decibels loud, and then have time averaged 90 decibels, and you have a live band that's playing 90 decibels time average. That time average will meter exactly the same. The peak measurement on that recorded music may meter 100. The peak on that live band may meter 125. So if you use peak measurement as even the updated ordinance, if you use peak measurement, every single outdoor live event in the city would be in violation of the ordinance. So I just have to, again, I guess I have some skin in the game because if I can't do live events, I can't operate my business. But I just want to do something. I want to make sure that the measurement is tenable for me as an audio engineer to actually complete my
So
job.
when you said that the previous events of the social club were probably like in that 110, 120, were you talking about the max or the peak?
Max.
Okay.
So yeah, I did a show at Val Air a couple years ago. It was a very heavy bass act. It was Trippy Red, and the loudest inside of that of Val Air was, I think, at 122 C fast. Now that would probably peak at about 150.
Okay.
So, and I think that's about all of the points. If there are any other further questions on the science of it, I'd be open to this.
Scott?
I'm hoping to try and find ways to simplify some of this
Right, yeah.
conversation. And
I feel like I've been in science class.
let me ask this question.
Yeah.
Would it even be worth having amplified sound if it's not at least at 80 to 85 decibels in this case?
An acoustic guitar, I can yell at 80.
Yeah.
And again, talking, your Italian family at Christmas, if you got your Italian family at Christmas in this courtyard area and there's an acoustic person just lightly singing in the background, the meter will read whatever is the loudest, and they may be in violation of that even with the unamplified portion of their program.
So if the council decides that amplified sound is appropriate at this location, I just wanted to have that out there, that I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time, my recommendation, on something less than 80 or 85 decibels.
And an 80 to 85 decibels, you would basically be able to do a singer-songwriter speaker on a stick is what we say in the industry, but just a single like microphone and acoustic guitar, and 85 is about the maximum that could tolerate.
So this really couldn't be much of a concert venue at 85.
Right, and you know, to the developer's point, the term concert isn't really what they're going for with the way it's been explained to me.
Isn't it, they want to have an event space?
I mean,
Right.
that was my question. I mean, I appreciate the sound piece, but my question was for Todd, and what type of events, and what is the range? That's the piece that I'm struggling to understand.
And, you know, that's something that's been brought up. Again, this was a little bit new to us as we were going through this aspect. When we were looking at the social club, a lot of people have been asking, what do you envision? And I've relayed to a lot of people. Myself and Paul Rottenberg, who owns Orchestrate Hospitality, number of restaurants around town. But we own Malo. Malo's been in place at the social club since it opened in 2014. We did a fairly significant renovation right before the social club closed to Malo. And we raised our hands. This is what I do, commercial real estate. We knew the opportunities with this property and a lot of the hurdles. As we were going through it, you know, we were looking at that back building as trying to maintain and preserve the amount of energy and money that our community invested into that for live performance art, and events. The courtyard was discussed quite a few times, as today it has the tower in place, it has a wooden stage. It's a pretty harsh space. It was discussed a lot of how can we make that courtyard softer, how can we make it more inviting, how can we utilize it better as a enclosed event space. And so that's what we spent some time and looked at. We've hired Confluence landscape architects to work on some designs to sort of figure some of that out. Again, we do have the intention of bringing down the stage as well as the tower. When we look at events, again, I'm not in the event world, I'm not in the music world. I reached out to a couple of people that are and said, you know, at what level is this appropriate? And right, wrong, or indifferent, they were saying, hey, Todd, you know, to do any live performance out there in an environment like that, you have to be around 100. And so that's what our original request was. I've learned a lot more from everybody involved in this to sort of see what it is, including attending the readings that day. You know, when we talk about events, this is not going to be a concert venue. This is something that we're not going to be promoting. We had a unique opportunity to strike a deal with the Des Moines Firefighters Union. And I would say that I'm more here on behalf of making sure that this building, they're looking to be their home in the future, full 100% circle, considering a lot of their members worked in this facility years ago. For that to come about, for them to be successful there and be able to keep that afloat, it's going to involve renting out their, in essence, union hall for events. And those events are going to be everything from a wedding, retirement party. We have Girls Rock that was looking at a spot to use this summer for a summer camp for a couple weeks. It's going to be an event space that can range all over. We're not looking at this to be a concert venue. What I don't want to get into is, and I understand that there's residential condo units adjacent to the space. And I don't want to get into a situation where I'm at conflict with my neighbors on a constant basis. Part of the numbers that we are requesting is, if we end up at 85, my fear from talking with the people in the music industry, in the event industry, is that we're going to be breaking that on a very constant basis. And then if we're, you know, it's just going to create conflict. So some of the numbers that I'm requesting, which again aren't overly science, are being told, are at numbers so that we can work with them. You know, we looked at it sort of saying, hey, how many events are we going to use or not? Again, a lot of this is going to be more so what is going to be in demand for that back building, the theater building. We know there's going to be some events that are going to be, hey, we want to use the rooftop patio for a get-together for our 20 people. That would be something that they would be able to rent that out and generate some income to cover their overhead for the space. There will also be a heritage festival that might say, hey, we want to rent out the back building and the courtyard for a day-long celebration. And that might include some amplified sound from a band that they would bring. This is not something that we're looking to be bringing in regional acts to do concerts. There's plenty of great spots in town for us to do that. So we're just trying to get to a number that we can facilitate a little bit, again, the aspect of what the firefighters union is looking at and move forward from there.
I will say, and I don't want to overstep too much because it's not my ward, but this social club had been like a really important cultural space for a lot of people in the community. I think that moving forward, it would be good to have this cultural space again for events, having the courtyard. I've spent some time there. I've gone to some events there. I have friends who held events there. And I do think it's important that we have more of these community and cultural spaces in our city. So that is kind of what I am going into this discussion that's what's on my mind.
One question that did get brought up, and Officer Stroop, and again, part of this discussion day is just setting ourselves up for success and not a constant conflict with our neighbors. When we talk about the citations on a sound reading, how, is it based on the peak, or is it based on the average, or what would be, because that might help, at least me, as I continue to learn, understand when you come and do a sound reading, is it on the peak, or is it on the...
Can I? Yeah, normally we write citations based on the peak.
Okay.
And I think I can answer another question for you, and one Councilman Gatto brought up. If you can believe it, we actually simplified this ordinance in 2017. Oh, I know. I was here. Yeah. If they had an acoustic set or just people in the courtyard, the way the ordinance reads, they're held to the same decibel level, but it's changed to A-weighted. So we measure unamplified music and the human voice in A-weighted, and amplified music gets measured in C-weighted. So that's the only distinction that, after the simplification, that's the only distinction that's been made, is the weighting level. And to explain that a little further, y'all remember weighted grades in school. If you get a B, you get points for an A. So the meter gives a different weight to each frequency. So A weighting gives a big break to bass. So if you're playing like a 60 hertz bass note at 100 decibels, the meter's going to read 80. In the C-weighted scale, if you play that same 100 decibel bass note, the meter's going to give us 97. So that's the only difference. But of course, the human voice and unamplified instruments don't normally make those heavy bass notes, so it's not a concern.
And if you have no bass present, your A and C readings will actually be pretty close. A useful thing for audio engineers is an actual C minus A measurement, which tells you how heavy specifically just your bass is.
Well, bass is what's rattling their windows.
Right.
I mean, that's the biggest complaint, is the bass.
Which is why I don't know the timeline on this one, but initially the ordinance was 100A across the city. And that's actually relatively attainable for even loud concerts, 100A. Then people kept complaining about bass. Meters were taken, found that they were not in violation of the ordinance. Oh, well, we're not accounting for bass. So it was switched to 100C, but now when you add the bass in there, something that is full frequency audio that may meter 90A may meter 110C. So that's when discussions came up again, because 100C is not attainable for concerts. So that's where that came about.
Mayor, council, not to drag this out, but we do have residents in the audience who would like to address the council in response to the developer. I don't know if that's appropriate. It's up to the council.
How's everybody feel? Should we listen? I'd like to get some input from some residents.
Yeah,
I think.
let's hear from residents too.
How many do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? All right, why don't you come up? If you wouldn't mind, one at a time, and how long should we give each one?
I don't know, I just have another engagement at 10.
Yeah.
I didn't think this
I know, we all do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
Mr. Mayor, council members, thank you very much. My name is Jim Heckman. I'm the president of the Homeowners Association at 111 City Lofts, which is the building that stands directly across the alley from the property that's under consideration here. First of all, I want to thank Sue Ann and Sergeant Stroop for the work that they've done on this. They were very accommodating to come back and take the sound study. They've been very good about keeping us in the loop of what's going on, and we very much appreciate their work on this. The sound readings that were taken, and I don't challenge any of the readings that were taken by Officer Stroop, but the sound readings are taken for 1 minute, and that's it. And those measurements are made over a 1 minute period of time. You're getting a scientific measurement that tells you something, but it doesn't tell you what the experience is over 2 to 3 hours. And the one thing that we learned from the Des Moines Social Club in the times that it had outdoor events, and I don't know, anybody can guess of how loud they were, but nobody really knows because no measurements were taken. But what we learned is that that is not an appropriate place for amplified outdoor music. It literally caused people, particularly on the east side of that building, to leave their homes while those events were going on. You have, I did share a letter with the council on behalf of the Homeowners Association dated April 13 with some comments from homeowners appended to that. This is not an appropriate, as the letter states, and I think everybody in the building would agree, that this is a residential area. The city has made it a residential area in the incentives that the city has given for residential development downtown. Nobody in that building wants to see the Des Moines Social Club property go unused. We all want a good use for that building. But this is not the appropriate use. And even Todd admitted that he can't comply with the compromise use that city staff had suggested at 85 decibels. He stood here and told you he can't comply with that. But nonetheless, we're expected to suffer the consequences of that noncompliance. There's a $17 million investment at assessed values in that building. You know the market value of those units in that building are even higher. $4.5 million of those assessed value of those units face that courtyard. And the developer, if the developer needs to have these permits for that business model, it is the wrong business model or the wrong buyer. We want to see something good happen at the social club. We don't want to be forced out of our homes as a consequence of it. So I'll go back. You can talk about the scientific measurements that are done over the course of a minute. And as I say, I don't challenge any of the readings that Officer Stroop took. I was standing right next to him for most of those readings. But listening to that for 2 to 3 hours is frankly an outrage. That's not what people expected when they bought their units. It's not what they expected when the Des Moines Social Club was allowed to put amplified music outside. What we learned from the social club, we should keep in mind, and that is it's not an appropriate place for amplified music in that courtyard. Thank you.
So your position, go ahead, Josh.
Well, I guess I have a question, because I don't consider all amplified music the same. I know some of the sound folks will say, we treat it all the same, but the events, I think, are potentially very different. So would you feel the same way about live music versus, amplified background music for a retirement party? Are those the...
Well, I'm not, if it's amplified music outside, it's loud inside the units. And it makes all of those units have recessed balconies. It makes all of those balconies unusable for the people who own those units. The unit at the, I have to get my directions correct here, at the southeast corner of the building, the balcony for that unit is closer to the rooftop on that back building that the union is thinking of leasing than I am to Mayor County.
Let me rephrase, so
Sure.
that maybe, because I'm trying to get input that would be helpful in making a decision. And what I'm hearing is that if I think any amplified music is okay, it doesn't matter from your perspective. I should just allow the amplified music because it's all the same. So if I disagree with the conclusion that this space should allow no amplified, that I think it's appropriate for some amplified music, you're saying it's all the same, so there's no distinction that, and nothing that, from a homeowner's perspective, we can work with you on and work with the developer to, because my take is I have concerns about live performance in this space. I do think that that's a lesson from the social club, but I maybe feel a little bit different about trying to figure out from an event venue type of perspective how we can work and utilize these spaces.
The music, whether it comes from a DJ's sound apparatus or a band, live band, is still the same. It's still loud. It is still a noise disturbance under the city code. And I think the city staff coming up with the idea that they could do one concert a month and not exceed 85 decibels is probably a compromise, I think, that the building, the owners in the building could live with, because it's not very frequent. But to have the kind of frequency of events, or the possibility for the frequency of events that's being asked here, is not a compromise. In fact, it's a more intensive use than the Des Moines Social Club, which itself, because it didn't run events every weekend. But as I said, we've learned from that, and that's not an appropriate place to have those kinds of events amplified outside. What's done inside the building doesn't matter.
We also learned, however, that 85 decibels wasn't really feasible for an outdoor event, I feel. Like, that's the message that I got from all the conversation around sound.
So your position would be that your homeowners association could possibly compromise at one event a month? That if they were able to rent it out on a Saturday night for a wedding, that would be outside on the rooftop? Or you're just absolutely, we don't want any events down here, this isn't the appropriate use? Unfortunately, it's been built that way, and there's not any other uses.
Well,
that's the way it's been marketed.
There was a slide shown that it said, if I remember it correctly, 85 decibels limit, 65 on the rooftop, no more than one event a month with amplified music outside. I think the owners in that building can live with that. 90, no. 95, no. 100, no. That's how, that's because, as the officer stated, there's no difference being on those balconies and in those units at those levels than being right next to it, because essentially you are right next to it.
We also learned 65 on the rooftop isn't even feasible when nothing is happening.
Right. You stated it, and we've heard it. 85 isn't. We can't get to 85.
A room, like a courtyard full of people is going to be over 85, is what it sounded like.
And I'll go back to the point that I made earlier, and that is, I think what we learned from the experience with the Des Moines Social Club is that it's not appropriate, period.
I guess my fear is that this is just going to stay empty. Because my fear is this is going to stay empty because it's an event venue, it's a community venue, it's made for these types of, it had art shows and it had concerts, which might not be what we want to move forward with, but it had, festival type of things, had communities coming together, poetry slams, any of those things are going to be over 85 decibels.
It wasn't, as I read the slide, it wasn't an event venue before 2013.
Right, but it is now, I guess. My concern is just that, like, what else would what do you propose for this space to be used for?
I'm sorry, say that again, please.
What do you propose for this space to be used for?
I don't have a proposal of how the space is to be used. I think that's whatever a buyer thinks is appropriate. What I'm saying is that this use is not appropriate.
Okay.
You know, that building renovation, taking it from commercial to residential, started in, the first units were sold in 2007, 6 years before the Des Moines Social Club came on that site next door. So it's, with all respect, it's not always been an event center. It was not anticipated to be an event center when that building was renovated and the units started selling.
Okay.
So,
I'm sorry, I have to go.
thank you very much for your attention. And
All right, could I quickly ask a kind of quick show of hands? Everybody agrees with what was presented here by the Neighborhood Association, is that correct? Okay.
And it was the homeowners association.
Oh, I'm sorry. The homeowner association. You guys aren't going to be applying for a neighborhood grant, is that correct?
Well, I saw there was some money available. Thank you very much for your time.
All right.
And just for reference, if folks want to know, we have individualized comments. I mean, I think you had a letter by unit with comments from folks in the homeowners association, right? I mean, there was
Yes.
an attachment that went unit by unit with comments from the various people in those units.
There was a letter that I sent to Ms. Donovan on April 13 and copied the city council on it, and there are comments from people who, living in the units today, who experienced the Des Moines Social Club.
It's,
yes.
I think it's all in the item.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, any closing comments? Mr. Ward Councilman, anything?
I mean, I'm trying to figure this out. I do think, so my take is, while I don't think this is an appropriate venue for live performance, and I think we need to be very careful about the type of events, I do think the building is appropriate for event space, and figuring out how we get that balance, I'd like to try and figure out a way to address the neighboring concerns while working from an event perspective. And I don't know that I've got the right balance yet today. I'm not inclined to go beyond the 85 in figuring that out. I mean, there were a handful of events, but I'd like to work and try and figure out how we find a solution.
And that's 85 max as opposed to peak? Or which?
That's a good question. It's, I think, got to be the 85 max rather than peak.
85 max, okay. And so we need to hold some of these, the science lesson here, because we're going to have another conversation this evening, aren't we? The Lordson stage.
Well, yes, but I think we're just talking timing as opposed to.
And so is there a date that this is proposed to come back before the council, or is this a council?
I think we need to have, I would suggest we need more discussion. To Josh's point, I believe that there is an avenue to think that you're not going to have any events, and especially when you have that theater, or I'm thinking of all the wedding receptions that people want to have. How do you do that successfully and still keep at the level that's not annoying to neighbors, but still have opportunity for revenue, to make it a live space again? So I think we just need to have a little more conversation. Learn a lot about sound.
Scott?
Mayor, I think we need to hear from the applicant here, though,
urgency, because this is a decision that needs to be made fairly quickly, I believe. Do we have weeks? Do we have a month?
Do we have a couple days?
For me and our group to be a buyer, we have weeks, which is soft, yes. Yeah.
Sooner the better, right?
I will say, I think that we maybe need to look into how we measure our sound, what other cities are doing, if they're using that peak, if they're using the max, if they're using the A-C, or what kind of measurements are, best practices.
Yeah, that would be a helpful to understand the way that other ordinances are currently written a little better, and that would help for multiple issues that we are facing.
So how should we bring it back? Should we bring it back into another work session, or, Scott, what are you going to propose?
It's a great question. We need to be productive in that conversation, so I think council needs to let me know what remaining questions they have yet this morning, so we can check on the other cities. What was additional questions that you had?
I mean, it's really a question of,
Peak and max.
well, there's
Measurements.
the peak and max question, but I mean, it's the mix of how do we build in some safeguards, and how do we provide protections from for the neighbors, and maybe what are the limitations and what are the number of uses that are going to be needed here.
So they've proposed 6, 12, and 18. So what is it that we believe is inadequate? Is that what you're saying?
Right, like, Sue Ann, have you heard it all from the Maxwell residents? So that'd be across the street north.
There have never been concerts since the Maxwell has been occupied.
Okay, well, there you go, that'd be why.
And this building probably blocks all the other people's.
Generally, it would be helpful for me to understand from council, are you leaning towards the consideration that's on the presentation at the 85, or more towards what the developer is asking?
To me, what was on the presentation doesn't make sense with the science of like how it's gonna, the 65 doesn't make sense to me, the 85, a little less so. I think it depends on how strict we're being with our measurements
That's
and what kind of
helpful.
measurements we're taking.
Thank you. Thoughts? Need more time to think through it? Okay, so unfortunately, Mayor, I think I need to come back to the council after having some additional conversations on what that actual next step is.
It would have been, just from my perspective, I mean, I'd heard from the neighbors, who we did a good job sharing the information with the neighbors to think about. I didn't really get any of this information until this weekend. So it makes it very hard to make a decision and to weigh things when it's all being presented. So it might have been helpful to at least bring us along a little bit in advance. I mean, I was hearing from the neighbors before I knew what the issue was. So it's challenging to make a balanced and informed decision. I mean,
It's a little more time.
yeah.
Okay. So I'll have to get back to council on what the next meeting or discussion is.
Okay. And if anybody has, council, any more thoughts, let's feed them to the manager, and that'll help him shape when and how the next discussion is going to be structured. Okay?
Thank you for the time.
Thank you all for attending. Appreciate it. And council, thank you for taking your morning a little longer than I think we'd all thought, but I think good information presented, and thanks staff for your work as well. What time are we going to be back?
No closed sessions.
Okay, we have no closed session, so we'll see you all about 4:30, 4:45. Meeting's adjourned.